Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Sandy Smith, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Sergeant Janet McNeely. Today, we remember and commemorate the Battle of Fromelles. On the 19th of July 1916, the last of the Australians to arrive in France from Egypt became the first to take part in a major operation when the 1st Australian Division joined the 61st British Division in an attack on German positions near Fromelles. A feint designed to draw German reserves away from the Battle of the Somme to the south, the operation was conducted in broad daylight under direct observation and heavy machine gun fire. It was a disaster. In less than 24 hours, 5,533 Australians became casualties. Some 2,000 of those were dead. The 61st Division, having contributed about a third of the attacking force, suffered over 1,500 casualties. Realising the significance of Fromelles to our young nation, Charles Bean returned to walk over the ground on the day of armistice, to think, reflect and record before the battlefield returned to peace. He found the old no man's land simply full of our dead. The skulls and bones and torn uniforms were lying about everywhere. He described Fromelles as one of the bravest and most hopeless assaults ever taken by the AIF. This evening, we commemorate all those whose names are listed here on the Roll of Honour and the survivors who returned home. We are honoured to acknowledge His Excellency, Mr. Antonis Semoustis, High Commissioner of the Republic of Cyprus, and the accompanying delegation. We warmly welcome Mr. John King, President of the Returned and Services League of Australia ACT branch. We warmly welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Australians Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Presents arms.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is got by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Bravo party! Shoulder! Arms! Bravo party! Order! Arms!
The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Harold Cox. Harold Cox was born on the 27th of January 1875 in Emerald Hill, Victoria, the son of School Inspector Ross Cox and his wife Mary. Harold had 3 sisters and 2 brothers and received his education at Melbourne's prestigious Scotch College. On completion of his schooling, he served 2 years with the 5th Victorian Rifles during the war in South Africa, where he was a company quartermaster. In his hometown of Wangaratta, he was remembered as a keen sportsman, playing golf and acting as a secretary for the local club. After his return from the war, he took up employment as an insurance officer and branch manager at the AMP Insurance Society, where he worked for almost 10 years. Harold Cox enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 19th of January 1915 at the age of 39. He was allocated to the 23rd Battalion as a second lieutenant and embarked from Melbourne on board the troop ship Demosthenes in mid-July 1915. He arrived in Egypt in September and was sent to the Gallipoli Peninsula. Cox's battalion served around Lone Pine and manned some of the most dangerous areas on the peninsula. Cox remained on Gallipoli until December 1915, when the Allies abandoned the campaign and evacuated the troops. On arrival in Egypt, Cox was promoted to lieutenant and transferred to the 31st Battalion. He arrived in France with his new unit in June 1916 and was sent to the nursery sector near Armentières. This relatively quiet area of the front gave incoming troops an introduction to life on the Western Front. This introduction was short-lived, however, as Cox prepared to take part in his first major action at Fromelles. The Battle of Fromelles began on the 19th of July. Troops were tasked with attacking the German front line surrounding the treacherous Sugarloaf salient. The heavy man salient extended outwards into no man's land, offering the enemy an advantageous position from which to fire at advancing troops from multiple directions. Bombardment of enemy lines had been taking place for 3 days before the beginning of the battle. The Allies were confident that the enemy had not survived it and they could easily capture their objectives. Unfortunately, the bombardment alerted the enemy to the impending attack, allowing them time to prepare for the onslaught. The Germans survived the shelling and were quickly able to man machine guns and begin their own bombardment once the Allied shells had stopped falling. The advancing Allied troops walked into a relentless hail of machine gun fire, which decimated several waves of Australian soldiers. They reached the German front line, but owing to the overall failure of the battle, the troops were forced to withdraw. In one night, Australian casualties stood at 5,533 killed, missing or wounded. Official war historian Charles Bean labelled the attack the worst 24 hours in Australian history. Hundreds of men went missing. Amongst them was 41-year-old Lieutenant Harold Cox. A Red Cross inquiry determined that he had been killed in action shortly after going over the top. He was wounded during the enemy's bombardment as a shell blew his shoulder away. A comrade later relayed to the Red Cross he saw Cox lying wounded in the trenches shortly before the enemy unleashed liquid fire into their positions. Cox's body was recovered from the battlefield at Fromelles and buried by the battalion's chaplain, who wrote to the late lieutenant's family. I had a long talk with the lieutenant just before going into action, and he was overjoyed because that day he'd received big mail from his loved ones. He was universally loved because of his fine, manly spirit and his devotion to duty. In death, as in life, he had a kindly smile on his face. Lieutenant Cox was buried at Rue Petillon Cemetery in Fleurbay, near where he fell. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right amongst more than 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Harold Cox, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Round of party! Shoulder! Arms!
Please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Round of party! Presents arms! Round of party! Shoulder! Arms!
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Round of party! It was done! Round of party! Quick! March!
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.